Alberta made a desperate, impossible calculation. And when it came due, the price was paid 2,000 miles away. Right now, a vast expanse of forest, one of the largest intact ecosystems on Earth, is changing. It's burning hotter, faster, and longer than ever before. Its survival depends on a single variable that no one can control: the wind. And for years, that variable has been turning against us. By the spring of 2026, the boreal forest was not recovering. It was reloading. A fire season so aggressive it didn't just break records, it rewrote the very definition of catastrophe. Not a regional disaster, not a national emergency, an atmospheric event. A plume of smoke so immense it blocked out the sun over cities that never even knew they were connected to the fire. And as that plume entered the jet stream, the forecast was no longer about weather. It was a countdown. New York City had 48 hours before its air became unbreathable. What do you think is the single most overlooked threat from these megafires? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It should have been contained. It should have been a problem for one province, one nation. But what they didn't understand, what the models couldn't predict, was that the ground itself had held a grudge all winter long. We make these documentaries because the connections that shape our world are often invisible until it's too late. A huge number of you watch and love these videos, but forget to subscribe. If you want to understand the forces reshaping our planet, take 1 second to click that button. It's the single most important way to support what we do, and you won't miss what's coming next. Let's begin. The real question is, did Alberta simply lose control of a forest fire, or did it just awaken a monster that had been sleeping under the snow for 6 months? A monster with a reach that could cross a continent. The boreal forest was never meant to be tamed. It stretches across northern Alberta in an unbroken sea of spruce, pine, and fir. A landscape carved by glaciers and defined by fire for 10,000 years. The ground is a deep, carbon-rich layer of peat, dry, flammable, and ancient. In a normal year, the fire season runs from March to October, a predictable rhythm of flame and renewal. Summers are hot, lightning is frequent, but the system had a balance, a memory. And then, the memory broke. The 2023 wildfire season was the warning shot. It was unprecedented, a word that officials like Christy Tucker from Alberta Wildfire used without exaggeration. That year, 1,088 separate fires burned a total of 2.2 million hectares. That is a number so large it loses meaning. To put it in terms that mean something, it is an area larger than the entire state of New Jersey. Vanished, it was more than 10 times the 5-year average. 10 times. The system wasn't just stressed. It was shattered. And as the snows fell in October 2023, something new, something dangerous, was happening underneath. The fires didn't all go out. They went down. Smoldering deep in the peat bogs, insulated from the cold, burning without flame or smoke. They were called holdover fires. Zombie fires. In the spring of 2024, Alberta Wildfire confirmed it was actively monitoring 64 of them. 64 embers from the previous catastrophe, just waiting for the snow to melt, waiting for the wind. It was a problem built on a flawed assumption. The assumption that winter still meant the end. It didn't. Winter was now just a pause. A quiet intermission before the next act. A province on high alert. A forest floor preloaded with fire. A new season dawning on a landscape that had never fully healed from the last. And everyone remembered what came before. We've talked about the science, but there's a massive human cost here a lot of people miss. For those who have lived through one of these fires, what's the one detail that news reports never capture? Share your story in the comments. It's important for people to understand the reality on the ground. Alberta has always known it was living with fire, but it never understood the speed, the scale, the sheer violence of what was coming. The landmark event wasn't a forest fire. It was an urban inferno. May 3rd, 2016, a fire nicknamed the Beast ignited near the city of Fort McMurray, the operational heart of Canada's oil sands. Initially, it was just another wildfire, one of many. Then the weather changed. Humidity dropped, winds gusted, and the beast woke up. It moved with a speed that defied every model. At its peak, it was consuming territory at a rate of 381 hectares per hour. It wasn't spreading, it was exploding, generating its own weather systems, throwing embers miles ahead of its main front, creating a storm of fire that was unstoppable. The evacuation of 88,000 people was the largest in the province's history. The images were apocalyptic. A single highway, choked with cars, driving through a tunnel of flame. The city burned for weeks. When it was over, 2,400 homes and buildings were gone. The insured damages totaled $3.77 billion, the costliest natural disaster in Canadian history. The total area burned was 589,552 hectares, a scar on the land visible from space. Fort McMurray proved the old rules were dead. A fire could be so powerful it could create its own environment, defy suppression, and erase a modern city from the map. The Beast was a paradigm shift. It forced a change in thinking, in funding, in strategy. Alberta's Minister of Forestry and Parks, Todd Loewen, inherited an agency, Alberta Wildfire, that was now armed with more resources, more aircraft, and more technology than ever before. It was a front line in a war they were preparing to fight again, and they were losing. The lesson was learned. The resources were deployed. It should have been enough. It still was not enough, because the next warning wasn't in the remote north. It was in one of the most famous, most protected places in the world. On July 22nd, 2024, a lightning strike ignited a fire in Jasper National Park, a jewel of the Canadian Rockies, managed not by the province, but by the federal agency Parks Canada. For 2 days, it grew. Then, on July 24th, the winds shifted. The fire made a run directly at the historic Jasper townsite. The evacuation was frantic. The fight was desperate. Night vision helicopters dropped water in the dark. Fire crews from across the country converged. But the fire was too fast. It breached the town's defenses. When the smoke cleared, 358 structures, a third of the town, had been destroyed. The insured losses climbed to $1.3 billion. Aaron Sutherland, a vice president at the Insurance Bureau of Canada, spoke about the aftermath in stark terms. He noted that even a year later, many residents were still trapped in bureaucracy, just trying to get permits to rebuild. The town was wounded. Deeply, Jasper was different. It wasn't a company town in the deep woods. It was a global tourist destination. It showed that no place was safe, not even a national park with dedicated federal resources. It exposed the brutal truth of modern wildfires. You can do everything right and still lose. The fire doesn't care about jurisdiction. It doesn't care about preparedness. It only cares about fuel and heat and wind. And the wind was starting to carry the consequences farther than anyone had imagined. If you've gotten value from this deep dive, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone in your family. These events affect more people than we realize, and understanding the chain of events is the first step. It really helps us get this information out there. The fire itself was only the first part of the weapon. The second part was the delivery system. For years, the smoke from Alberta's fires was a regional problem, a haze over Edmonton or Calgary, an inconvenience. Then, on June 7th, 2023, the smoke stopped being regional. A massive plume from fires burning across Canada was captured by the upper-level jet stream, a high-altitude river of air that flows from west to east across North America. It traveled, intact, for thousands of kilometers. The target was the eastern seaboard, specifically New York City. The sky over Manhattan turned a sickly dystopian orange. Streetlights flickered on at 2 p.m. The air, thick with the smell of distant burning pine, became hazardous. Air quality index readings, or AQI, soared past 400. To put that in perspective, any reading over 300 is considered hazardous, a code red emergency for the entire population. For a few hours on June 7th, New York City, the financial capital of the world, had the worst air quality of any major city on Earth. Worse than Delhi. Worse than Beijing. All because of a forest fire burning in a country hundreds of miles away. This was the new reality. It was no longer a misconception that the smoke was just ugly haze. Scientists confirmed it was saturated with PM 2.5, fine particulate matter so small it can bypass the body's defenses, lodging deep in the lungs and entering the bloodstream. It was a public health crisis delivered by the wind. The 2023 smoke event proved the hypothesis. It demonstrated with terrifying clarity that the isolation of geography was an illusion. A fire in the boreal forest of Canada and the air quality in downtown Manhattan were now directly, inextricably linked. The pathway was established. The precedent was set. All it needed was a bigger fire. A more powerful plume. And the zombie fires sleeping beneath Alberta's soil were about to provide exactly that. The fight against these fires is a story of incredible technology and human limits. It's a battle fought on two fronts, on the ground and in the digital world of predictive analytics. It is Alberta's own version of drilling a third straw. A desperate, high-tech gamble against an enemy that ignores physics. The modern Alberta Wildfire Agency is a paramilitary force. They deploy fleets of air tankers, from smaller amphibious planes that can scoop water from lakes to massive DC-10s converted into flying fire engines. They operate 24/7, using helicopters equipped with night vision and infrared sensors to map fire perimeters and attack hotspots in the dead of night, a time when fire activity used to die down. It doesn't anymore. On the ground, elite crews like the Helitack and Rappel teams are inserted into the most remote, inaccessible parts of the forest. They are the frontline soldiers, working in punishing heat and smoke for weeks on end. They are supported by a vast network of logistics, moving people, equipment, and supplies across an area the size of Western Europe. And their every move is guided by data. The Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, or CIFC, acts as a national command hub, coordinating resources and sharing intelligence. They use sophisticated computer models that ingest weather data, fuel maps, and satellite imagery to predict a fire spread, not hours, but days in advance. It is an extraordinary effort, a billion-dollar high-stakes ballet of technology and courage. And yet, it is a strategy designed to fight the symptom, not the disease. Because here is what they cannot control. The lightning. Approximately 40% of Alberta's wildfires are ignited by lightning strikes. They are acts of nature, random and unpredictable. They can't control the multi-year drought cycles that turn the forest floor into a tinderbox. They can't control the wind. And, most critically, they cannot control the climate. The slow, relentless warming that is making the fire seasons longer, the fuels drier, and the weather more extreme. The entire apparatus of modern firefighting, as impressive as it is fundamentally reactive. They are building a taller wall to hold back a rising ocean. The engineering is brilliant. The dedication is heroic. But the ocean is still rising. I know it's our second time mentioning this, but we've seen from our analytics that an incredible number of you who watch to the very end of our videos haven't subscribed. If our work means something to you, please hit that button. It's our own fire insurance policy, and it genuinely keeps this channel going. The spending on suppression buys them time. It saves towns. It protects infrastructure. But it doesn't solve the underlying math. And the math was getting worse. And then came 2026. The year the math finally broke. It didn't start with a bolt of lightning or a careless campfire. It began silently, in the frozen muskeg of northern Alberta, somewhere in the vast, unpopulated wilderness between Conklin and Lac La Biche. It began with a zombie, one of the dozens of holdover fires that had burrowed into the peat in the fall of 2023, smoldered through 2024, and survived another winter. It was a fire that was 2 years old before anyone even knew it was there. The spring of 2026 arrived early and hot. The snowpack was thin, and it melted fast. By mid-May, the forest floor was critically dry. A powerful ridge of high pressure settled over the province, bringing record-breaking temperatures, and most importantly, a steady, relentless wind from the northwest. The conditions were not just perfect, they were historic. The zombie fire awoke. Sensing the oxygen, it crawled out of the peat and found the surface. It started as a small, creeping ground fire. Within hours, fanned by the wind, it climbed into the crowns of the jack pines. This is what firefighters call a crown fire, the moment a fire becomes a different kind of beast. It was no longer crawling. It was running. Alberta Wildfire detected it quickly. They gave it a number, and they threw everything they had at it. Air tankers laid down lines of retardant. Helicopters pounded it with water. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a garden hose. The fire was moving too fast, generating too much energy. By day 3, it had merged with 2 other new fires and was exhibiting the behavior of the beast from 2016. It was creating its own weather. A pyrocumulonimbus cloud, a thunderhead made of smoke and fire, began to form over the blaze, generating its own lightning and its own unpredictable winds. The numbers coming into the provincial fire center in Edmonton were unbelievable. The fire was doubling in size every few hours. It was spotting, throwing burning embers miles ahead of its main front, creating new fires before crews could even get to the old ones. The decision was made to evacuate several oil sands work camps, shutting down a significant portion of the country's oil production. Not because the facilities were burning, but because the air was unbreathable and the only exit roads were threatened. This was no longer a fire to be fought. It was a region to be abandoned. But the most dangerous part of the fire wasn't on the ground. It was 30,000 feet in the air. The pyrocumulonimbus cloud was a chimney, a massive engine pumping millions of tons of smoke, ash, and particulate matter directly into the upper atmosphere. It was a payload of pollution, injected with such force that it punched straight into the jet stream, and the jet stream was pointed southeast. The models lit up. The trajectory was unambiguous. The plume, a dense, cohesive river of smoke, began its journey. It crossed the Canadian prairies, dipped over the Great Lakes, and barreled towards the most densely populated corridor in North America. The warnings went out. An air quality alert of a type never before issued. This wasn't the hazy, filtered smoke of 2023. This was the direct, undiluted output of a firestorm. New York City had 48 hours. The first signs appeared in the late afternoon. A strange, yellowish tint to the sunlight. A metallic taste in the air. By evening, the sun set as a dim, red disk in a brown sky. The next morning, the city woke up to twilight. The Aki, which had been in the moderate range the day before, exploded. It passed 200 by breakfast. It passed 400 by lunch. It kept climbing. In Midtown Manhattan, the streetlights were on, casting an eerie glow on streets filled with people wearing masks. Not for a virus, but for the air itself. The city's health commissioner issued a stark directive: stay indoors. All outdoor activities were canceled. Schools were closed. Flights were grounded, not because of wind at the airports, but because visibility was approaching zero. The PM2.5 concentration reached levels that were, literally, off the charts. It was a public health emergency unfolding in slow motion across an entire megalopolis. All of it caused by a fire burning in a forest that most of the city's 8 million residents couldn't find on a map. The connection was no longer theoretical, it was visceral. The consequences were no longer abstract. They were choking the air from a city's lungs. The most expensive, powerful city in the world was brought to its knees by an event that happened 2 days before and 2,000 miles away. It was a profound demonstration of the planet's new, fragile interconnectedness, and it begged the question that no one wanted to answer. We've shown you the past, the present, and the likely future. If you think it's critical for people to understand this, please, this is the last time we'll ask. Subscribe now. It's the only way to make sure these stories get told. This wasn't an act of God. It was the predictable result of a century of choices. The 2026 fire was a hypothetical. But the zombie fires are real. The 2.2 million hectares burned in 2023 are real. The $1, 3 billion destruction of Jasper is real. The orange sky over New York City in June 2023 was very, very real. The elements of the catastrophe are not fiction. They are facts, waiting for the right weather to assemble them. Alberta is not a cautionary tale. Not yet. It's a laboratory. A place where the future of fire is arriving ahead of schedule. They are spending billions, deploying science that verges on science fiction, and risking lives in a constant grinding battle against a force of nature that is being amplified by a changing climate. The technological solutions are remarkable. The human courage is undeniable. The smoke still gets through. The fires in Alberta, in British Columbia, in California, they are no longer local events. They are injectors for a continental-scale atmospheric system. They are changing the chemistry of the air we all breathe. The fight to contain them on the ground is only half the battle. The other half is being fought in the jet stream, where no tanker plane can fly and no fire crew can work. Alberta built a wall of technology and manpower to protect itself. And that wall worked, to a point. It saved communities, it defended infrastructure, but it could not contain the sky. And the sky connects everything. The final uncomfortable truth is that you can have the best firefighters in the world, the most advanced technology, the biggest budgets, and it still might not matter. Because you can't build a fire break against the wind. The fire is coming. The smoke will travel. The real question